Ready for a deep dive?
Oh, definitely. I'm excited for this one.
Today, we're tackling anti-colonial resistance movements, but we're going global.
Sounds intriguing. Where are we headed?
Think South Africa. Think Israel-Palestine. Two very different struggles, but surprisingly connected.
And both marked by the legacy of colonialism, right?
Exactly. But here's the catch. South Africa ultimately ends apartheid, while Israel-Palestine, well, the conflict's still very much alive.
Which is why Rand Greenstein's book, Anti-Colonial Resistance in South Africa and Israel-Palestine, is so essential to our discussion today.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to colonialism, showing us how these movements resisted, adapted, and ultimately shaped the world we live in.
Precisely. And he's not just telling two separate histories. He's braiding them together, revealing the surprising echoes and divergences between them.
Okay, so let's start with South Africa. I mean, their fight against apartheid was about more than just race, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was this tangled knot of race, class, and national identity all rolled into one. It's about who had power, who didn't, and how to dismantle the whole system.
And how did that resistance take shape, like in the early days?
Well, initially, it was a lot of appeals to the British Empire, petitions, delegations, very much a let's be reasonable approach.
Which, spoiler alert, didn't really get them very far.
Not exactly. Imagine trying to reason with a brick wall.
Right, like talking to a wall. And
Yeah.
that's when organizations like the ANC, the African National Congress, and the South African Communist Party, or SACP, really stepped onto the scene.
And the SACP story is fascinating. Think about it. They're committed to class struggle, a core tenet of communist ideology, right? But then there's apartheid, this brutal system built on racial oppression.
So how do you reconcile those two things? It's like their ideological playbook didn't anticipate the messy realities on the ground.
Exactly. And that struggle, that tension, led them to develop a radical concept in the 1920s and 30s, the Native Republic.
The Native Republic, what did that even mean?
Imagine being told that to achieve true racial equality, you needed to create an entirely new republic. This wasn't some abstract idea. It was a spark that ignited real debate and action.
Whoa, they were basically saying the system was so messed up that you couldn't just change a few things. You needed a complete overhaul.
Exactly. It shows how their understanding of colonialism was evolving. They realized it wasn't just about economics and class, but also how deeply intertwined it was with race, how it permeated every aspect of society.
So they're asking people to envision a whole new world.
And that must have been both exhilarating and terrifying.
Absolutely. Exhilarating and terrifying, yeah, I can see that. But it makes you wonder, were people ready for that kind of change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it
Yeah.
gets to the heart of what Greenstein's trying to do, highlight the complexities these movements face.
Right, like there's no easy answer, no one-size-fits-all solution to dismantling something as entrenched as colonialism.
Precisely. But speaking of complex, let's shift gears to Israel-Palestine. We're talking about a whole other kettle of fish here.
Okay, so different context, different stakes. What are we looking at here?
Well, unlike South Africa, where the struggle was within a single state, in Israel-Palestine, it's about land, statehood itself. You've got the Zionist movement with the goal of establishing a Jewish state, and it's all happening in a land already populated by Arabs.
So it's not just about pushing back against a distant colonial power. It's about navigating this incredibly charged space where two groups are essentially vying for control.
Exactly. And that complexity is mirrored in the Palestinian resistance. They weren't just up against British colonialism, but also the Zionist project, often seen as two sides of the same coin.
Okay, so how do you even begin to untangle that? Where do we see that playing out in the early days of Palestinian resistance?
Well, let's take the Palestinian Communist Party, the PKP, as an example. Now, you might think their focus would be solely on uniting the Arab population against Jewish nationalism. But initially, they primarily focused on organizing Jewish workers.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Why focus on the groups seemingly aligned with the other side?
That's what's so fascinating. Remember those internal divisions Greenstein talks about? The PKP recognized that class struggles existed within the Jewish community too. Many Jewish immigrants were working class, facing exploitation, just like their Arab counterparts.
So it's about finding that common ground, that shared experience of oppression, even amidst this larger nationalist conflict.
Exactly. But it was a gamble, a high-stakes one at that. Could they bridge the divide between Jewish and Arab workers while nationalism was on the rise on both sides? It's a question for the history books, really.
Talk about a tightrope walk. It makes you think, did trying to play both sides ultimately help or hurt the PKP in the long run?
It's a question worth pondering. And it highlights a key difference, Greenstein points out, between the South African and Palestinian struggles.
You mean beyond the obvious geographical and historical differences?
Yes. Think about it. In South Africa, resistance movements, despite their internal disagreements, ultimately united under this banner of non-racial democracy. And that shared vision, it proved powerful enough to dismantle apartheid.
A testament to their resilience and strategic thinking, for sure.
Indeed. But in Israel-Palestine, that unifying vision hasn't materialized in the same way. Instead, you see a conflict that's morphed and adapted over time, mirroring the shifting realities of occupation, state-building, displacement.
And it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because both movements were fighting against these seemingly insurmountable odds. So what was different? What led to these wildly different outcomes?
Well, Greenstein offers some compelling insights. For one, he argues that there's no direct correlation between a movement's resources and its success. Having international support, access to weapons, media attention, it doesn't guarantee victory.
So what's the missing ingredient? If it's not just about resources, what else is at play?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while there's no single answer, Greenstein suggests that the role of allies played a significant role in shaping both movements' trajectories.
Allies. Okay, tell me more about that. How did allies factor into these movement successes and failures? Allies, huh? It sounds straightforward, but I bet it gets complicated when you're talking about deeply rooted power structures like colonialism.
Oh, absolutely. You can't just slap a friend of the movement sticker on and call it a day, especially when the dynamics are so messy.
Right. So how does Greenstein unpack this whole ally thing?
Well, he points out this interesting contrast. In South Africa, you see the SACP, which actually included white members who played key roles in the struggle.
Wow, really? Given the whole racial segregation thing at the heart of apartheid, that's pretty surprising.
Right. It shows a level of integration and, dare I say, trust that's pretty remarkable.
Okay, so how does that compare to Israel-Palestine?
Well, there was a different story. Jewish communists often found themselves facing suspicion, even hostility, and not just from the outside, sometimes even within the Palestinian movement itself.
Whoa, that's intense. It makes you wonder. Can you ever truly be an ally if you're seen as part of the group that benefits from the system, even if you're actively working to dismantle it?
It's a question that still resonates today, don't you think?
Yeah.
And it goes way beyond these specific cases. It's about confronting the complexities of allyship in any movement where power and privilege are at play.
It's like this. Whose struggle is it to lead, and where do allies fit into that picture? It's a tough one, for sure.
Definitely something to grapple with. But, what I appreciate about Greenstein's approach is that he doesn't shy away from these difficult questions. He lays it all out there. The internal debates, the strategic missteps, even the moments of doubt that every movement faces.
It makes it real, right? These weren't just movements. They were made up of real people grappling with incredibly complex issues, often risking everything for what they believed in.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that there's no magic formula, no one-size-fits-all approach to dismantling oppressive systems. It takes flexibility, critical thinking, and the courage to adapt and, importantly, to learn from both our victories and our defeats.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into anti-colonial resistance, it's clear we've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the intricate dance between race, class, and national identity, witnessed how these movements adapted their strategies and ideologies, and confronted the enduring challenges of solidarity and what it really means to be an ally.
We've seen how these movements, as diverse as they were, all grappled with the legacy of colonialism and its impact on their societies. And that's a conversation that continues to resonate today, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like we're peeling back layers of history, and the echoes of these struggles are still felt today. But ultimately, these movements offer us more than just cautionary tales. They provide valuable lessons for those of us continuing the fight for a more just and equitable world.
They remind us that change rarely comes easy. It requires constant struggle, adaptation, and a willingness to challenge not just the system, but also our own assumptions.
And with that, to our listeners, we leave you with this. As you reflect on the struggles in South Africa and Israel-Palestine, consider the parallels to our own time. How can we, in our own contexts, work to dismantle the legacies of injustice and create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive? It's a question worth pondering, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a question worth wrestling with every single day.
Well said. And on that note, until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, keep pushing for a better tomorrow.